Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we are going to be finally talking about Matt Reeves' The Batman, starring Robert Pattinson, Zoe Kravitz, Jeffrey Wright, Paul Dano, and of course Colin Farrell. And this movie was incredible. I loved this film and I cannot wait to talk about this movie in full spoiler fashion. So if you have not seen The Batman, definitely click off this video and come back to it after you have seen it, because this is going to be a glowing recommendation from me. But there's a lot of details in this movie that I want to talk about, some small and some larger picture stuff that I'll be covering all of it in this review. It's not going to be a play-by-play recap, but I am going to talk about as many things as I can remember off the top of my head about this movie after seeing it twice. I've been watching a lot of Batman movies this month. I watched 27. This is number 27 of the series that I've been watching. I've been watching a lot of animated ones. I've never seen really any of the DC animated films before besides like Lego Batman, but I feel like that's not in the same vein of all the other ones. And I loved a lot of them. I'll have a video ranking all the Batman movies later on this weekend, but there's a lot of elements from those animated films that I was like, wow, I want this to be a part of a live action Batman movie. And to my surprise, this movie actually takes all those things I was wishing for, almost all of them at least, and they implement it into this version of this character and this world and this Gotham, and it really is well done. My expectations in the very least were, to have a very nice stylistic noir mystery thriller movie with a great villain in terms of the Riddler, and that's exactly what I got, but it surpassed my expectations because I got these little things about the character of the Batman that was in these animated films that I felt like was missing from the other movies. And I will get some of the simple stuff out of the way, and that is Matt Reeves as the director. This movie is gorgeously directed, and it's directed with such confidence, and especially the cinematography by Greg Fraser is incredible. The use of the volume, the use of the practical aspects of this film as well, and the lighting and the look of this thing, it was very stylistic, very gothic, which is perfect for Batman. I think Matt Reeves did a phenomenal job putting together this film. It is 3 hours long, but it flies by, and that's in large part due to how it constantly invests you into this character, into this mystery, following, Robert Pattinson being really the world's greatest detective in terms of the Batman. And he's not necessarily the world's greatest detective because he makes mistakes. He's trying to figure all these things out, and of course he's not going to be perfect every single time, and if he was, it wouldn't be an interesting movie. But to see the way that he kind of holds himself in terms of his performance and how he just his posture and the way he walks and the way he moves and the way he talks and the way he just does all this acting with his eyes when he's looking around the room trying to figure things out, it's making you try to figure things out. And since you're so invested in this mystery and so you're trying to figure these things out and you're so drawn in and it feels like you're along on this mystery with these characters, it really does make the runtime fly by. Pattinson really is great in this role, and although he doesn't have too much dialogue, like I said, it's his physical performance that he gives in this role that really blew me away. And I do think, yes, I understand the issues that some people have with, there not being a lot of Bruce Wayne in this movie, but it's kind of interesting to see a movie that is solely focused on the Batman's perspective, because that's really, there's hardly any scenes in this movie where you're following a different character when Batman is not involved in the scene. The entire film is from his perspective. The only time it's not is really the opening scene, which is fantastic. Like I said, the gothic elements and it's slight horror elements in this film that Matt Reeves implements is phenomenal, and the Riddler and the way that he meticulously takes out these people, those kill scenes with the Riddler really are the only scenes to let you have a peek behind the curtain to see some things that the Batman is not seeing. But when you're in that room with him, working with Gordon, solving this mystery is phenomenal, because that's another thing that I loved about this movie. There's a great relationship between Jeffrey Wright and Robert Pattinson, and that chemistry of them being Gordon and the Batman and them working together to try to solve this mystery, and the fact that Gordon really does not trust anybody else in the police station because we don't know how deep this corruption goes. And so essentially all these political leaders had something to do with Falcone and his ability to take over the city after the death of the Waynes. And so all these corruptions that the Riddler is taking out all these people at very high places is a very fascinating story to follow, because you learn so much about the city of Gotham through this mystery, because it's so deeply rooted in the way that the politics work in this place, the way that's these people, how they became corrupt and how the mob really does run the city of Gotham. That's another thing that I can praise about this movie, is Gotham does truly feel like a character in this movie. And I said it in my Letterboxd review, but I kind of appreciate Batman Begins for the Gotham in that movie feeling very authentic versus, even in The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises, it feels like Chicago or it feels like New York City. But in this movie, even more so than any of the other Batman movies, it doesn't feel like a Tim Burton world of Gotham. It doesn't feel like a Joel Schumacher or some place in the real world. It feels like a tangible place called Gotham City that is solely, it's a world of its own, essentially. And this movie really does flesh that out. And I love the fact that we're getting a Gotham TV show, because I didn't really care to have that, because the Gotham show that we did have before was kind of okay, but to see this and to see how much of a character this city actually has in this film, and these characters that are living within it, I am fascinated to see what they do with that show. And so also having a great performance besides just Jeffrey Wright and Robert Pattinson is, of course, Zoe Kravitz as Catwoman. And I absolutely loved her in Kimi, which just came out on HBO Max. And if you have not seen that, definitely go check that one out. But she is also phenomenal as Catwoman in this film. And I love the dynamic between Catwoman and the Batman in a bunch of different animated movies, especially like the Batman Hush was one that this movie reminded me a lot of, and I love their dynamic in that movie. And so all these different animated Batman movies had this great relationship between Batman and Catwoman that I think some of the other live action ones kind of completely missed the mark of. I never really complained about The Dark Knight Rises and the portrayal of Catwoman by Anne Hathaway until I watched these animated movies in the past few weeks, and I started to understand why some people really do hate that incarnation of this character. And now seeing this movie, to see how great Zoe Kravitz is as this character, and actually returning to this role from her original role of playing Catwoman in the Lego Batman movie, which is a funny thing. She's the only returning cast member, I guess you can say, but she is great in this film, and I loved that dynamic between those two characters, this sort of romance that grows between them, but this, defining traits that they can never truly be together because of Batman's, real, I guess, need to not, kill anybody. The no guns rule and all that stuff makes sense in this movie, and he truly does not kill. I think there's one moment where I questioned if he killed, and that was towards the end of the movie when he's fighting one of the Riddler's goons, and then I think the goon pulls the trigger and shoots another goon across the little scaffolding thing. But that was the only moment where I thought he killed, and that's the one thing that the live action movies never do, because after watching a bunch of them, every single live-action Batman movie up until this point, besides Batman and Robin, has Batman killing people, whether it's on purpose or just, giving people the permission to die like Bale would do constantly. But truly, I do think that this version is most accurate to that rule, and it makes this character so much more interesting and makes that dynamic between him and Catwoman just that much more important. But to get a little deeper into the meat of the mystery of this film, one of the biggest revelations in this movie was to see how the Waynes were involved in it. And there's one, point of confusion in this movie for me, at least, when Riddler was able to do all the things he did, and Falcone had died, and then he turns himself into the police, and he's in that interrogation thing that's kind of reminiscent of that in The Dark Knight. But he's questioning the Riddler, or I guess the Riddler's really breaking down the character of the Batman, or breaking down Bruce Wayne. And there's a moment where you think that the Riddler knows that Bruce Wayne is Batman, but I don't think that's the case. I think he was just saying, Bruce Wayne was the one that got away. It was the one that they didn't kill, because he thought him and the Batman were working together in all of this. And I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, but comment down below what you guys think of this point of contention, because I think a lot of people, the point of that scene really is, oh my gosh, I think he knows that he's Bruce Wayne. But then there's a switch in the music and the way that Pattinson, Jesus, but the way he looks at Riddler at that point, I was like, okay, he doesn't know. And that was a close call. That was almost terrifying for his character. But essentially the revelation with the Wayne family is that, Thomas Wayne was, he was going for mayor, like he was in Joker as well, but he was going for mayor, and he had this whole renewal plan that was going to use a lot of money into rebuilding Gotham essentially from the ground up. And, Riddler being one of those orphans in the orphanage ran by the Wayne Enterprise, essentially the Wayne family owned this orphanage, and all that was screwed over because of his death that was orchestrated by Falcone, because of all these things, because of a very interesting family story with the Waynes that I never knew about. I never knew that Martha was originally in Arkham, because I don't know much about the Arkham family. I knew about the Arkham Asylum, but I haven't played the Arkham games, and even all the Arkham, or all the Batman movies, the animated ones that I've watched, never really dealt directly with the explanation, the origins of the Arkham Asylum. And I think that's a direction that they're going to go in the future, because that sounds fascinating to me. So I didn't know that there was an Arkham family, but the fact that Martha was a part of the Arkham family, and then of course you have Thomas Wayne and them coming together as being like the two, biggest, richest families of Gotham, Gotham and them coming together was a very interesting idea, but the Arkhams were very corrupt, and Martha's parents, her mom killed her father and killed herself, and then she had mental issues of her own. She was in and out of the asylum, and so all that was covered up by Thomas Wayne trying to get rid of this one reporter, and Falcone ended up killing this reporter. And so all that was fascinating to me, the way Falcone was trying to twist the words and to twist Bruce Wayne's perception of what the truth was, and that emotional scene between him and Alfred, which was a great scene, by the way. I did enjoy Andy Serkis as Alfred as well. I do think that in terms of the casting, when all the casting was announced, he was the one that I was most nervous about, even more than Robert Pattinson. I know a lot of people were concerned about his performance in this movie, but I thought he was going to be great because I've seen some of his other movies with The Lighthouse and stuff like that. But Andy Serkis as Alfred, is like, is he going to have that kind of comforting quality that Alfred is, I guess, that we know from him, at least in some of the past movies, especially the Dark Knight trilogy with Michael Caine. I was like, is Andy Serkis too intense of an actor to play this character? But he's kind of more akin to Jeremy Irons as Alfred, and I really liked how he comforted Bruce in that hospital scene. I really loved that scene. But knowing this rich history behind the Wayne family and how that corruption was even got to some of the best, Thomas Wayne being a good person, even the corruption reached all the way up to him, and it even corrupted him to a certain fault, and that leading to his death, and all that stuff was fascinating to me. And I really love how the Riddler twisted all these things around to expose all these people and to bring Gotham down to the lowest point Gotham has ever been. Because like I said, Gotham is a character in this movie, and it gets to a really low point once the city floods. Like, all that intensity towards the third act, the final, scenes of this movie were really, really intense. And in terms of the intensity and the action of this film, I loved it. All the Batman scenes, the first scene with him, of course, beating up all those guys. I love the fact that he slowly walks out of the shadows, and I love his, first monologue at the beginning of the movie saying that he is the shadows. And that's one thing that I will talk about in terms of negatives, is the voiceover that Robert Pattinson does at the beginning of the movie that comes back at the end of the movie. At the beginning, the first time I watched it, I was like, okay, I'm not sure how I feel about this voiceover, and it's only at the beginning and only at the end, and there's nothing throughout the movie, but he has this little contact lens essentially that records everything, and then after he rewatches it in the morning, he writes it all down in this diary. So that's essentially what this voiceover is. So there's a reason in world why he's saying all these things, but at times his voiceover can be saying the things that I feel like us as an audience, we don't need that to understand what's going on. When you have that image of that one guy looking up to the bat symbol and he runs away out of fear, you hear Robert Pattinson saying that he is the fear in the city, and he's putting this fear into these people, and we can see that. We know the character of the Batman, and we don't need to be told that, especially at the end of the movie, once everything has calmed down and Gotham is now flooded, and he's saving all these people, and he's talking about how, pain can be scars and the city is scarred like he was scarred. It's like, I don't need to hear him say all that, because I get all that from his character arc in this film. This movie does truly trust its audience, especially with the Riddler storyline, with, trusting the audience to be able to follow this mystery throughout the entire thing, trying to help, the audience kind of try to figure things out on their own. It was a very smart way to, kind of involve the audience, to trust the audience. But this voiceover, especially at the end, felt like Matt Reeves was no longer trusting the audience to get these certain things. And one thing that I noticed after watching the animated films that I realized was in the trailers was the whole I am vengeance thing. And I know everybody was super excited to hear him say I am vengeance when the trailer first came out, and so was I. I was like, that is awesome. That is an awesome line. But then you kind of see the Jason OMara Batman movies, which I think those 4 films, I think starting with Son of Batman, I think was the first one, to Batman versus Robin, to Batman Hush and Bad Blood and all that stuff. I loved Jason OMara's Batman so much, but he had a way of teaching Damian Wayne that it's justice, not vengeance. And so I was curious how this movie was going to handle this vengeance thing. And at first I was like, okay, he is vengeance. That's cool. That could have been a very one-note thing throughout the movie, but that's kind of the whole point of the film. That's the whole point of why Riddler is doing what he's doing. He's doing all of it out of vengeance. And Batman, he's like, am I making an effect on the city? And he inspired somebody as terrible and as cruel as the Riddler to do all these terrible crimes. Yes, he's unveiling the corruption in the city, which is technically a good thing and will help lead to the healing of the city, but he caused so much destruction. He was going about it in such a wrong way, and that was all inspired by Robert Pattinson's, character. And so I love that fact where the voiceover does say that, it's not vengeance that wasn't the right thing, that inspired the wrong thing. I love that idea that he's going to be learning from that. And in terms of the future of this franchise, I really hope it goes in a direction where he does adopt a kid, and we do have a live action Robin that really is younger kid. Because I know Pattinson said in some interviews that if they were to do a Robin storyline, they would want an actual like 12 or 13-year-old to play that character, and I would love that because I loved Damian Wayne in those movies. I haven't seen too much of Dick Grayson in terms of like him in the animated form. Usually he's already Nightwing in a lot of those movies, but I really do like the Damian Wayne storyline and having his character teach this kid that vengeance is not the way and that it's actually justice that you need to do, and teaching him the no kill rule and how intense Damian Wayne was in those movies, especially Batman versus Robin. I would love to see all that in live action, especially with the whole Court of Owls storyline in the Batman versus Robin movie. I love all that stuff, and I know that they've talked about that in interviews, or at least Pattinson has talked about how he loves the Court of Owls storyline, how he wants to see a Robin in there. Matt Reeves has talked about wanting to have Mr. Freeze, a more serious version of Mr. Freeze in these sequels, and that is all very interesting. And then there's the Penguin show that is coming out on HBO Max, and that one gets me very excited because, for one, Colin Farrell was incredible in this movie as his character. He was always entertaining every second he was on screen. The way he said his lines and the I guess the timing of it was always great. That interrogation scene between Batman and Gordon and the Penguin, when he realizes, or at least Batman realizes, that he got the riddle wrong, and Penguin's essentially mocking him for it, and then they just kind of leave him waddling in the rain. That was such a funny moment, and of course the Batmobile chase that involved him was great. A lot of sequences with Penguin was great, and I'm excited to see what they do with Colin Farrell's character moving forward, because he wasn't arrested. He's, out overlooking Gotham that is now flooded, to be able to kind of grab at all these loose ends that have been left after the death of Falcone. And so I'm very interested to see what they do with that show. I'm very excited to see what they do with that and the Gotham show. And in terms of the Gotham show, I honestly hope they do something that the Peacemaker show did, which is take these characters that were kind of in the background and make them the forefront and give them an arc. And there's one cop in this movie called Martinez, and the first time I watched the movie, I noticed him, here and there, and I was like, okay, this cop keeps on coming back, and I love his interactions with the Batman, and how this guy even has a little arc of his own, where at the beginning of the movie, he's like, why are you letting this guy in here? You can't bring him into the crime scene. And at the end of the movie, he's like, wait, what are you doing in here? And he helps Batman, or at least he doesn't really help him, but he is kind of involved with the Batman as, he's trying to figure out this last riddle of his underneath the carpet. And I love that little interaction. Those two characters together, for some reason, this random cop and Bruce Wayne's character, and the Batman character, was so fascinating to watch their back and forth, and how even they had a little arc. Even the mayor-elect, I think her name is REÁL, even her character has a little arc of, not trusted. She's like saying, oh, there's a vigilante running around the streets, and at the end of the movie, when Batman reaches out, she goes with him to kind of, lead everybody out of the water. I love that even some of these smaller characters had some growth and had some effect on this movie and were affected by the Batman in some way. And so to see some of these smaller characters be more fleshed out in a Gotham show or in a Penguin show get me very excited, because all these people, I'm very curious to see what they will do with their characters next. And of course, there is the elephant in the room, and that is once Riddler is, put in jail and everything has, calmed, or not really calmed down, the city's flooded, but once, the news is kind of more focused on the Batman being a hero rather than the Riddler, bringing up all this corruption, and he's in the jail and you hear a voice from now the cell in Arkham. And of course, that is Barry Keoghan's version of Joker. I am so excited to see what that guy does with this character. Barry Keoghan is a great actor, and I loved him in The Killing of a Sacred Deer. That's one of the first movies that I saw him in, but he's also in The Green Knight, and of course Eternals, and a bunch of other things. I love him as an actor, and I think he will make a great Joker, and I think his little interaction with Riddler was great at the end, and I think that they can really go towards the direction of, adapting the Killing Joke in a way with this new version of the Joker, because he's already in Arkham for whatever reason, and, the Killing Joke starts with, Joker in the asylum, and he kind of, has this interaction, he breaks out of jail, and you have that whole storyline play out, and I think that would be interesting to see somewhat of an origin for this Joker, because I'm sure we'll see that maybe with some Red Hood storylines, maybe get the death of Jason Todd, stuff like that. I'm curious to see if they go in that direction with this version of the Joker, but either way, I'm excited to see this actor playing that role in the future of this series. Gets me so excited for the future. And I'm sure I'm missing a lot of other things, but I want to wrap this video up because it's already getting pretty long. Have you guys seen The Batman, the 3-hour epic film from Matt Reeves? I loved this movie. Like I said, the only real flaw that I had with it was the voiceover, especially towards the end, not fully trusting the audience, but I loved, Batman's journey of going from vengeance to justice and having that sort of mentality that he has in some of the animated films with not killing, and especially the Catwoman storyline that is ripped straight from some of the other comics like Long Halloween and Hush. I really love that this movie took the things that I loved most about the animated films and incorporated it directly into this version of the Batman. I'm very excited to see what they do, if they make this a trilogy or whatever, how many movies they do. I'm very curious to see what they do in the future, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what you thought of this movie and the future of this, Batman verse with Robert Pattinson as his character and all these other actors. I'm curious to hear all of your thoughts as well. But that'll be it for my rambling. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like and you subscribe to the channel, and also check out my video ranking all the Batman movies that I'll have out later this weekend. So thanks everybody for watching, and I hope to see you all in my next one.